actually, you know what, we can just go ahead. So I'm calling the planning board meeting of August 19th, 2025 to order. We have a quorum and we do not have anyone missing. Correct. Wow, full house, great. So we don't need anyone on remote participation. And if I could get a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
All in favor? Aye. Was that an aye, John? Yeah. All right. Don't throw down. No. And has everyone had a chance to look at the previous minutes? And the July 15th was canceled, so there really isn't anything there. If there are any questions, comments, or changes, speak now. And if not, if I could get a motion to approve as presented.
I'll make a motion to approve the June 17th, 2025 regular meeting as presented,
And we also need to approve the July 15th technically.
as well as the July 15th meeting that was canceled.
Can I get a second? Oh, we don't even need a second.
just
All in favor, that's right. So many years of seconding. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, great. All right, public comment, who is gonna read? We have a pretty empty house, so I don't know if you'll have to read the whole thing, but is that you?
It's okay. Don't worry. It's all right. We lived with that a long time.
So we have one sign up for public comment, or this was just a sign in for the planning board meeting, but Chris, do you want to speak, or are you good? You're good?
Wait, let me get you a microphone.
Okay. Just come up to the podium when you're ready. You'll have 3 minutes. Just state your name and your address.
Yes, indeed. My name is Chris Smith. My address is 1216 Meadowlark Lane. And I've just got a couple of things that I wanted to read through. So you're going to see a request today that's coming up for a special variance that would allow one of the residents to further subdivide their lot. To be clear, as I'm going through this, I am all for and strongly support landowner property rights, and landowners should absolutely be able to develop their property within the rights that are afforded to them. The ordinances that this group and the council have put in place allow for flexibility. And so, an example, there's an option to build an accessory dwelling unit or ADU, which is fully permissible. That represents a reasonable balance between an owner's rights and the community's longer-term vision. What is going to be requested here, though, goes beyond that balance. The particular property that is going to be discussed, it originally had a modest 1,400 square foot home. That home was replaced with a 5,000 plus square foot residence, complete with a pool house. Now the owner is seeking a variance to subdivide that lot to construct another home that will exceed 3,000 square feet in the backyard of that property. When you add it all up, the result is a scale and density that simply does not fit with Marvin's established character. This lot backs directly onto an equestrian neighborhood, which is in the Farms of Meadowlark, where the open space, the pastoral feel, and the respect for scale are defining features. Granting this variance would place oversized suburban density directly against that equestrian setting. This is not what people move to Marvin for. It's definitely not what I moved to Marvin for. Our town has worked carefully over the years to ensure that development respects the rural, equestrian, and open space identity that makes the community so special. When new residents choose Marvin, this is what they're choosing. This is what they value. And if we begin granting special variances that create new parcels, basically for the sake of density, we erode the essence that is Marvin. So that is it.
Is there a presentation?
No, there's not. We can move to new business.
And I don't believe there was any unfinished business.
No, ma'am, there was not.
New business. So discussion and recommendation of zoning map amendment application 2025-3.
All right, the village has received a zoning map amendment application to rezone the 3.02 acre property located at 10515 Newtown Road, to rezone the property from rural residential to single SFR1. The rezoning will follow the procedure that we have outlined in Article 5.3 of our development ordinance. So I'm just going to kind of go over my staff memo, and then I will turn it over to the applicant for any further information, as well as then answer any questions by the board. So the subject property currently is zoned rural residential. The existing land use is residential. The property was purchased, I believe, about 2 and a half, 3 years ago. And the existing home on the property was demolished and a new home was constructed by the new owner. The request is basically to rezone the property to SFR1 to subdivide the property to create one additional lot. The surrounding property, existing land uses and zoning designations are all surrounding land uses are residential and vary between SFR1 and rural residential. One of the keys is that to the south of the property is rural residential. It abuts the Meadowlark subdivision, and to the east is the 5-lot subdivision, if you guys recall, that was approved or went through the process. I believe Planning Board made their recommendation on it in June of last year, May, because that would have been my honeymoon, in May of last year. And that subdivision, if you guys recall, was submitted under the old ordinance. That's why that property was on SFR1, because it was a vested application for the subdivision. All of that, that subdivision has now been, the construction plans have been reviewed and approved. The project has been bonded, and the final plat has been signed. I think it needs to be signed by the village engineer, but that essentially will be recorded within the week. So getting into then the zoning and the lot characteristics, as mentioned, the current zone, the current property is zoned rural residential, which the rural residential has a minimum of 2.5 acre lot. The proposal is to rezone to SFR1, which is a 34,000, roughly 35,000, which is a little under an acre minimum lot size. It's consistent with, once again, this isn't the first rezoning request for this year, but consistent with the old R Marvin residential under the old ordinance. The property, if you guys also recall, under the previous text amendments, we did take neighborhood meetings and make them optional or recommended for conventional rezonings such as this. However, the applicant did decide to go ahead and hold a neighborhood meeting. That neighborhood meeting was held on Monday, August 4th, here at Village Hall. And the sign-in sheets as well as the meeting summary is included in your packets for your review. So getting into the overview, the subject property was zoned rural residential with the adoption of the MDO. The property owner and applicant both have had previous conversations with planning staff about constructing an accessory dwelling unit or an additional dwelling unit onto the property. However, according to Article 10 of the MDO, the proposed size of the structure that the property owner would like to build exceeds the maximum allowed per the ADU size of 1,200 square feet in Article 10. The owner now would like to subdivide the property to construct an additional single-family residential home on a newly created lot that would be accessed from the adjoining property, or that 5-lot subdivision that would be installing a new public road. That's really my high level it's a pretty straightforward request. The planning board shall consider both the consistency and reasonableness of the rezoning with the Village of Marvin 2020 Land Use Plan and any other officially adopted village plans. This includes the following: the size, physical conditions, and other attributes of the area proposed to be rezoned, the benefits and detriments to the landowners and neighbors and the surrounding community, the relationship between the current actual and permissible development on the tract and adjoining areas and the development that would be permissible under the proposed amendment, and why the action taken is in the public interest and any change conditions warranting the amendment. With that being said, if the rezoning is approved, the applicant would then be allowed to subdivide the property in compliance with the SFR1 zoning district, so it would be a minor subdivision. All that is administrative. They would then just have to follow that procedure for, that's outlined in Article 7. Essentially, they submit a plat to the village. We review that plat for compliance, making sure that both lots comply with the zoning district as well as complies with the state statutes for plat requirements, making sure that it has the right certifications and all that stuff on it. And if, once that has been reviewed and approved, then it can be signed and be recorded and the new lot would be created. Any questions?
I have a question about easement. So it looks like what's submitted is a flag lot.
That may be the old one. Let me check your packet.
Yeah, I didn't understand how they have access to the street. How will the new lot have access?
The one in your packet, no, it would not, it would be a fully created lot, it wouldn't be flagged, it would be access from the 5-lot development that is on the adjoining property.
But has the 5-lot property already got final platting?
Yes.
So wouldn't that have to go through the whole process again?
For final plating? No, because this, in short, the 5-lot subdivision was a major subdivision, once again, done under the old ordinance. So it went through that procedure, but once again, subdivisions, either major or minor, are still administrative decisions. The rezoning now is what is basically that legislative decision that the old ordinance, we did, remember, like subdivisions would come to you guys, but properties would already be zoned R Marvin residential. Subdivisions were a by right use, and yes, you guys would review and provide a recommendation, but legally, council couldn't really deny a subdivision. That's why we created this rural residential district to trigger rezonings, to have a legislative decision of a rezoning of a property for potential development.
And to preserve rural residential.
Correct. And so that neighboring property, it was under the old ordinance, it was vested, so it was then zoned SFR1 because it had a vested plan already in place going through the application process. Once again, that sketch plan was then approved, the construction documents were reviewed and approved, and their final plat was reviewed and approved. All that's still administrative. It wasn't necessarily brought to you guys, but at the same time, those are administrative decisions because they already had the zoning of SFR1, if that makes sense. So,
But if you're adding a driveway, which means more concrete, more, what,
you're talking about from a construction plan review?
yes.
All that was already then factored into their plans. The property owner, I believe, deeded a 50-foot access easement to connect to this property. And I discussed this with the engineer. From a stormwater standpoint, it doesn't change because it's a low-density impervious. And essentially, since that's a public road, and will be the village's road, the driveway would then just have to conform with our minimum driveway standards that's in our engineer manual. Like the driveway cutout and the curb and all that. But it's not adding impervious, it's not adding any, how much should I say this? It's not adding an amount of impervious area that would trigger a different type of like stormwater infrastructure on the 5-lot.
The deeded easement is, like, it can never be pulled, challenged.
What do you mean?
So if a property owner deeds an easement and who decides to, are you able to undeed an easement?
I'm not an attorney and I do not have that answer.
It's the difference between having a flag lot and having a non-flag lot, so that's.
Correct. And essentially, if to have the property subdivided, it would have to have access. And so that access has to be on a plat, and once again, it's a recorded access agreement that was done between this property owner and the adjoining property owner. And it's also referenced on the final plat of that 5-lot subdivision, and it's shown on the plat. So from a legal standpoint, it's there. Regarding taking away, I don't have that answer.
I guess I didn't hear the answer, but we already have a driveway into the existing home, and we're allowing a second driveway right next to this? Is that correct?
No.
How are they getting in?
If you, the five, I'm just gonna have to pull this up.
They want to, they have gotten a deeded easement to the
You got,
five-lot
where's the thing?
development that got approved prior to,
Yeah,
that was already in, prior to the
because
MDO
I
being approved.
didn't want to put this in
They
their
were the
packet.
grandfathered one that probably wouldn't have gotten approved, I don't know, who knows. But,
Yeah, I get it.
so they've been given an easement and they're gonna be going through that road. I don't know. I mean, we
Hunter.
see that there's already a second driveway that's going
Yeah.
back. I don't know if that's
That's
construction
what
or
I
what.
see. I see two driveways. Okay. That's what's confusing me. One into their home and one right next to the home. Where's that picture?
It's handed out today or what's in the packet?
I'm looking at Google Maps.
So would you, there's a proposed site plan in the packet, so it's showing a landlocked lot.
Right, but we're looking at the fact there is an existing pathway.
That's right.
There's an existing.
That's the
gravel-
old, that's the old driveway from the old the old home.
Okay. The gravel one, not,
Correct.
so a new one into the existing home, right?
Would not be accessed off of that.
So is that driveway gonna be closed down then?
The existing gravel,
Yes.
it's not being utilized. I think it was used as a construction entrance, correct? Yeah.
It's being what? It's gonna be removed within the next. Removed.
Hunter, as I recall, that adjoining property, when it was rezoned, weren't all of the lots along one side of the property and the new street on the other side?
That is correct. And I have that pulled up on your screen, if this will work. Why is this monitor
Is
not
that
working
it?
over here? So, just for context, and like I said, this 5-lot subdivision has nothing to do with this rezoning, but I'm trying to make sure it's clear on what the access is. So, here's Newtown Road. The subject property being rezoned is over here. So this is the 5-lot subdivision, this is their final plat. I'm trying to, there we go. So basically, as you, what the heck? Sorry about this. I love technology. So it would be accessed here off of the 5-lot subdivision. So the new lot that would be created would basically face this way. Think of it this way. Essentially, think of it as a 6-lot added to this 5-lot subdivision.
Except that we would,
I can take a crack at answering your easement question, but the only way to cancel it, both parties would have to agree to cancel it. Once it's deeded, whoever, the beneficiary and the grantor both have to sign a separate document to cancel it.
just don't charge us for that, please. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm gonna get a bill anyway.
So, and then, let me pull this up. So then this is the proposed, wait, it's not on your screen, ha ha ha. I'm gonna scream. So this is the subject lot that is being considered, that, for the rezoning request. So here's Newtown. So once again, this would be now, this is the property of the 5-lot. So the proposed lot that they are looking to create, if the rezoning is approved, would be at the back and then be accessed right here off that public road of that new subdivision.
And that is a public road?
Yes,
That's what I'm asking. Okay, so they're using the 5-lot to get into there.
correct.
They're the 6th lot, basically.
Essentially, yes.
Thank you.
Septic technically.
It's just two different property owners. It's just the same builder. So,
It's not on this site plan.
And would not be subject to the agreements that the other 5 lots would be subject to, the neighborhood agreements.
So
The
repairs,
development
things
agreement,
like
yeah.
that, they wouldn't be.
Because they're not part, that is that, they're not technically part of that neighborhood.
So they just have a, but that's a Public or private road?
It's a public road.
So
The village will be.
so there is no agreement.
So that's why I'm saying the roads will be public. The driveway cutout and all that will have to then be installed and as put to our standard. Essentially, the property owner would then be if there was any ever damage to the road, they would be responsible for their driveway. It'd be the same instance of for your driveway and fire, same concept.
I understand now. Took me a while.
So, like I said,
So you're saying, so is this the end of the cul-de-sac right here?
the end of the cul-de-sac would be roughly like right here, yes.
Okay, so really it's part of the neighborhood.
It's easier to think that way, yes. Like, it's essentially like,
Like it's not behind their house, in other words, like,
the newly created lot would be behind the house that was constructed, yes.
Here's a lot, they're coming in there.
Yeah.
See, if I got it right, they're coming in here, there's a home, and their home's here,
Yeah,
just
Okay.
across the street,
okay, all
right?
right.
essentially, yes.
see.
That's the easiest way to, like I said, look at this. Now,
Okay.
I'm gonna, as mentioned, this is a rezoning request. So this vision that the applicant is proposing here is if the rezoning is approved. Remember, you're not voting on this, you're voting on the rezoning. Ultimately, if the property is rezoned to SFR 1, even though it's 3 acres, there's no other way to create a second lot for a total of 3. This would be the only way that it could be subdivided. Just want to make sure that's kind of clear, because in any rezoning case conventional rezoning case that we've had over the last year, I always, convey this to you guys, is that in these rezonings, you're looking at the worst case scenario of properties, because you're giving, if approved, the property owner gets the rights of to develop the property within the the parameters of that zoning district. Meaning that a minimum of roughly an acre, and the setbacks for both the existing home, pool house, as well as the newly proposed would all have to comply with the SFR 1 setbacks and minimum lot requirements. Is that clear? Okay.
So basically, the rezoning is being requested because they want to put a 3,000 square foot house in the back of their property.
That is correct.
And why would they not just do an accessory dwelling?
I will let either the applicant or the property owner answer that question, if you guys want to come up, or someone.
The reason for not just an accessory dwelling is it is a residence for his parents. So,
Big house for,
So the house in front, house behind is his parents.
in the back, the one behind would be parents, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
and how big is the pool house? Or the structure behind the house, the existing house?
How big is the pool house? It's like 12, yeah, I can pull up the permit. 900 square feet.
Sorry?
It's, I think, approximately about 900 to 1,000 square feet. I would have to go back and pull the zoning permit for that. So staff is recommending approval of this because the land use plan outlines the property as residential. It outlines that obviously keeping the low density 1 house per acre, so it is consistent with the land use plan. And so therefore their staff is recommending approval just because of the consistency with that plan.
I disagree with the consistency, seeing that we specifically established the rural residential to preserve rural residential, and the 5 lots next to it probably would not be a neighborhood had they not already submitted prior to the MDO. So, and technically, this lot on all sides, besides the one that got through with being grandfathered in, is all backed up to acreage of rural residential. So to me, it does not align with our current ordinances or the land use plan, so.
And I will mention that that did come up during the neighborhood meeting, and what's in front of you is the applicant. If the property is rezoned, it's a newly created lot, it would have to then comply with all ordinance requirements in the MDO. One of those would be the buffer requirements between the development and existing properties, which requires a buffer type C, which is a minimum of 20 feet in width. And so the applicant did prepare this exhibit for you guys that shows the landscaping that would be done on the newly created lot. And once again, that would be required per the ordinance. So that was essentially one of the things, and that's why we have that in the MDO with Article 11, is to buffer between uses. The current property, since it was developed under the old, doesn't have it. So I want to make sure that was kind of clear on what's in front of you and how that came to be.
The thing that concerns me about this, getting back to what Kelly was talking about, is the rural residential. I mean, because if we do it here, we can do it anywhere. You know what I'm saying?
No, correct. And like I said,
And that concerns me, because people don't buy acreage to have additional houses built, usually. They want the peace and the serenity. So this is what concerns me, is, continuing to do this type of thing.
And what does it do to the surrounding values?
Right. And is it good for Marvin?
Anybody have any other questions, any comments, concerns?
So if this wasn't,
I'm so sorry, do you mind?
so if this was not zoned to the new residential, to the single family, and the homeowner decided to build the maximum amount house that he could as an accessory dwelling unit, which I believe is like 1,200, 1,300?
it's 900 administratively, and then it's basically the window between 900 and 1,200 has to be approved by the Board of Adjustment via variance, but 1,200 is the absolute maximum for an ADU.
Okay,
And they
there are
can have a
no,
stove, right?
No, they can. It's a full accessory dwelling unit. The maximum size is just 1,200 square feet.
Okay.
there are no buffer requirements then? Is that correct?
It depends on how you interpret the ordinance. I'm not gonna, the reason I say that is because those buffers are platted for the most part, and so if you would be subdividing this on that plat, you would plat that buffer, and then you would have the planning requirements with that. So in theory, no, because you're not creating a new lot. I would have to double check the aspects of Article 11, but I'm pretty sure like the additional requirements for an ADU has the size requirements, has that, it must be owned and under, obviously within the deed as the principal structure or the main property. It must look in the same characteristic of the principal structure and be accessed by the same, it can't technically have a secondary access to the ADU. You would have to access it from the main driveway for the principal.
But there still would, so as what, they're trying to accomplish is create this as a family, property, but there would not have to be anything put behind there to block. So basically, it would be to protect the, as you're calling, the rural area back there,
Well, it would have been protected if the lot hadn't been clear-cut in the first place, so there were a lot more trees back there
then,
prior to construction, so that wouldn't even be a
but
concern.
are they required to be put back?
Sorry?
Are they required to be put back?
They are required to be put back, but we have found a hole in the ordinance that does not designate where they should be put back, so they apparently were put back in the
So
front.
all the trees that were removed for the home construction were documented. You guys got a tree removal permit for it, and all of them were mitigated per what the ordinance stated. And they were mitigated in the front, and
Okay.
then maybe a few in the side.
Okay.
So it did meet the ordinance requirement regarding how many were taken down or removed, and then that amount was then planted back on the property.
Okay, thank you.
would it not be possible to just add on to their house and have like an in-law suite?
It would be, yeah. I mean, because it's all part of the principal structure. And, I mean, and I would treat that, so what the ADU language states is you can have a attached ADU, and it really then is, yes, just, there's not necessarily a size requirement. That size requirement is where, when it becomes detached, it's a separate structure on your property, and it just can't exceed that 1,200 square feet. Under the old ordinance, and this was conveyed to the property owner, the old ordinance did allow, I mean, it was actually allowed for a larger ADU. The old ordinance, we did allow ADUs under the old ordinance. Those requirements are very similar to what's in the current MDO. The biggest difference is the size. Under the old ordinance, I think it, if I recall, the way it read was it could be up to 1,500 square feet or 50% of the first floor footprint of the principal, whichever is larger. So,
So they could do that and make it bigger?
but that was under the old ordinance.
Okay.
And that was discussed prior to the adoption of the MDO.
You're saying they can't add on to this home 3,000 square feet?
I mean, they could if they wanted to, as long as as long as it complied with setback requirements.
And the new MDO, so, 'cause I got real familiar with the old ordinances with the square footage, like percentage of the square footage that, the footprint that you could have in an accessory dwelling. That is, so how many accessory dwellings can you have on a property?
One,
Okay, so what is the pool house considered?
an accessory structure.
And what defines the structure versus a dwelling?
Dwelling's defined as a livable unit. Basically, I mean, I don't have the short end of what the definition of a dwelling is. It is the livable unit that has the bare necessities to be inhabitable, meaning a bathroom, a bedroom, and a kitchen, essentially is what that means. So,
And so how does the MDO then deal with how many accessory structures and dwellings? Like, is there it's like when you're playing Monopoly, you can put a bunch of hotels on your,
in short, there is not a maximum number of allowed accessory structures on a property. We're going to kind of talk about that in the next agenda item. Essentially, what it states is that the principal structure cannot exceed 30% of the principal structure cannot exceed 30% of the total area of the property, but accessory structures don't have a size cap or amount cap. Essentially, you have aspects in Article 2, 8, and 9 that regulate where and how big accessory structures can be. So Article 8 is going to have your setbacks. So the accessory structure then has to comply with the setbacks for specific accessory structures. If it exceeds the height of the principal, which in theory is going to be this, it might exceed the size at that point, then it has to comply with the setbacks of the principal structure. So front setback is 50, side 16. This is all for SFR1. Rear is 40. For accessory structures, I believe it's 10 on the rear and side in SFR1.
so, and I apologize to the applicant right now, because this is just this, I want to ask about this because this has nothing to do with them, but, so currently, our MDO says that you can put as many accessory dwellings and accessory structures on.
Not
the property.
dwellings.
Okay, not dwelling, one accessory dwelling. So you can have your primary home, you can have an accessory dwelling, and then you can have as many accessory structures on your property as long as you meet the setbacks on the.
Correct.
perimeter.
So if I want 5 barns,
They
and
all-
then I could do it.
If you got the acreage and want the money and they all comply with setbacks, correct. Now,
It's like a
Correct.
bad Lego construction.
essentially, though, the way you look at it is that once again, most of Marvin is regulated by neighborhoods with HOAs. HOAs have CCNRs that most likely will kind of regulate that even further. Under the
Rural structures, though, are along the main road.
the old ordinance and like I said, we're going to talk about this in the next agenda item. The old ordinance had a clause in there that it was the amount of accessory structures on the property cannot exceed 2/3 of the principal unit square footage. So essentially, if you had a 3,000 square foot home, you could have 2,000 square feet of accessory structures. That's, we don't, like I said, we do not have that in the new. It's one of these, and like I said, we're going to talk about this in the new, but the short end is like we're seeing a trend in people wanting to put pickleball courts and other things. And yes, take up area on their property with impervious surface or roof structures or something like that. And so we've done some research and we're looking to add language in there, kind of either regulating that a little bit further. Correct.
Basic question. Are they requesting rezoning of the entire
Yes.
existing lot? Okay,
Yes, so the whole property, the whole 3 acres would have to be rezoned to SFR1.
Otherwise, it wouldn't be big enough to remain
Correct.
rural residential.
Correct. And did you guys explore a lot on the adjoining property?
Currently, no.
Anyone else? All right, then we will take it to a vote. We will do this in the affirmative, so just as a reminder, I'll read out the motion. The motion will be read in the affirmative, and each member will just give a yes or no. So the motion is to recommend approval of zoning map amendment 2025-3 and find that the proposed zoning map amendment is consistent with the recommendations and goals of the Village of Marvin 2020 Land Use Plan, other officially adopted village plans, and is reasonable and in the public interest. John?
No.
No.
Yes.
Yes.
No.
So that was 1, 2, 3, 4, so 4 to 3. So
4 to 3.
Motion does not pass.
So with that being said, obviously, I know this came up in a previous rezoning. The motion to recommend failed. It still goes to council for the final decision. It will be, this one's a little different because that one was a 3-3 vote. But essentially, in the staff report, it will be that planning board did not recommend the proposed rezoning. But it still does go to council. That public hearing will be at the September 8th, whatever that September meeting is. Second Tuesday. September 9th. Okay.
I've been trying to get it to shut up.
I'm usually responsible, but
All right, moving on to discussion recommendation on zoning text amendment 2025-2.
Madam Chair, can I have 1 sec just to make sure that the applicant understands?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead, sorry.
For rural residential, I think we screwed up on that. Rural residential. I really do. Well, you have to look at what's best for Marvin too, and that's what I go back to. But that's what she just said.
you can't do that. That's not our job.
All right. All right, you guys ready to continue on? Okay. So moving on to the next agenda item, the text amendments. As previously mentioned, so MDO, ordinances, they're living documents. We want to be proactive and kind of think through ways to make them better, make regulations clearer, on top of sometimes things don't really come up until they come up, type thing. In your packets is a draft of one that we have identified that has came up regarding subdivision identification signs, like project signs. And I talked with Rick about this today. In the ordinance, we mention, I think I kind of put this in the overview. We mention that all new subdivisions basically requiring the development of new public roads within single-family residential districts must be identified or have a name or have a sign identifying the project. Mainly referring to, you have to have like a residential subdivision monument sign that you see. And it then states that the minimum identification requirements that a sign clearly showing the name of the subdivision be posted at the primary vehicular entrance, and talks about temporary signage. If you guys are familiar, I mean, the Heritage at Marvin has one out. Now, once again, those are all non-conforming, they're vested, fine. However, the 5-lot subdivision that we were just referring to have put one out, and they're, it's unclear in the ordinance of like what then applies. So what staff has drafted in this initial text is basically clarifying that a new subdivision can have a temporary sign, basically marketing or saying coming soon, whatever, after an approved plan has been, either the property's been rezoned or the plan's been approved, and basically puts that under temporary signage, and basically puts the parameters at that it shall not exceed 32 square feet in area or 10 feet in height. Maximum allowed is 1 per street frontage, and it should only be allowed during the time of such construction or development is actually in progress and in accordance with a valid building permit, or when the lots are for sale. So this language, we looked at a couple different municipalities, but we looked at Weddington and Waxhaw kind of directly, just since they're right there. And they both kind of had, like I said, clearer language regarding these, project signs. And in essence, the way that I initially interpreted this, and like I said, I consulted with Rick on this, and him and I were on the same page. The way it reads in the current ordinance is, yes, they're allowed, but then they have to comply with whatever, the sign type that's being proposed. Well, those signs are on 2 posts, therefore I would consider them post signs, which the maximum square feet is 12, I think, of sign copy area, and the maximum height's 6 in Article 17. These are kind of standard marketing signs, and like I said, that's, in discussion with Waxhaw, and I even called Stallings, because Stallings has a very similar ordinance. Stallings just basically, once a subdivision or development's approved, they basically just allow it, and it's no permit, but this section's under the required with permit section. So the whole gist of this is that it's clarifying that they're allowed and what the requirements or regulations are. Does that make sense?
I have some questions, because there's a lot in here, so, first of all, what are are we talking about signs on construction containers? So like I'm looking at the table 15.1.
Mm-hmm. You mean
The
17?
special events and temporary structures. And it says construction containers. I thought we were just talking about signs, but I guess you can have a sign attached to a construction container, like an office, like a construction office, or, is that what that refers to?
Okay, you're gonna have to start over. Where are you at?
15.1?
15.1 or 17?
Well, so, hold on. This is Article 15, special events and temporary structures.
Oh, I mean, you can ask your question, but this change would be to Article 17 under the sign stuff.
That was what the link went to.
Oh, that is, my bad.
Okay.
Sorry. I think in the memo, it said, but I think in the memo, doesn't it say link to Article 17?
Yeah.
It must have, the link must have not saved when I changed it. I think that was from an old, I reused my memos, so my apologies on that. But yes, Article 17, and I can pull that up if I need to.
Okay, so here's when I read this part, this is what, so my question is, and read like you can have, so as an example, you can have a sign, so as soon as you get approval for your building, you know, for your development, whatever it is, you can have a sign that goes up that says like coming soon. But then it talks about, you know, during active, it can stay up until, you know, construction is done. Is it only allowed up during the construction period? Can they have multiple signs within the process of, you know, because construction doesn't really start for a while. So it's like, what, like, let's say, there's like a, you know, there's a property that's had a sign up about, you know, a development coming for years and years and nothing's happened. So how long does something stay up? And if it's just allowed, because you're basically saying until it's sold out.
Correct. And so, once again, this is our first draft of this, and these are all points that Polly and I have kind of discussed when we were drafting this and looking kind of for planning board's guidance here. The way this is written is to kind of have a little flexibility in how it's interpreted, meaning that the intent of it is that, yes, it is up, marketing coming soon and all that. In normal sense, developments are then, you know, the land development's done, zoning permits are pulled for home construction, the homes are built, development's done, developer's out, that sign's gone, so be it. So it's written to the extent of like, yes, it's intended for that, but at the same time, you know, if the economy crashes, whatever, it's still marketing that this subdivision has lots available and there's lots for sale. So it can be interpreted either way as how it's drafted. The intent is where it still allows for developers to market the subdivision, either, you know, begin before land development, during land development, or even if 20 of the 25 lots are done and there's still 5 lots left. I mean, and an example is Broadmoor. Broadmoor still has their sign because they still, I mean, the development's pretty much done, but they still have, I think, 5 or 6 custom lots available. So it's one of those things that, you know, I felt like in the current ordinance, it wasn't clear enough of what was allowed. And we took a stab at then, okay, here's the regulations behind it, but we're open for any type of feedback or discussion on what those regulations should be, meaning that if it is time frame. I mean, I think under the old, I want to say, if it didn't have a time frame, I mean, something we could do is that they could pull a sign permit for a temporary sign, and it's 6 months, but they have to keep getting that permit renewed. So there's a fee associated. I mean, there's ways that we can do it for sure.
I mean, it's 6 months, I mean, even a year, I think would be okay, but, because most places are, I mean, well, Broadmoor, it took forever just to even like get going, so.
Correct. And their sign's been up probably 2.5 years now.
Yeah, it's really for the, he said.
Yeah, there's like 5 lots at the very back that are custom. So they're still marketing those lots, and they have one of their model homes is like their custom. I mean, it's a temporary construct, like in the ordinance, so it allows. I mean, basically that's their custom showroom.
I mean, it's almost like you, and maybe it's just a matter of them having to apply for multiple signs, but like a coming soon sign when you're not actively selling, right? Because like if you're not actively selling your lots, just having a sign up indefinitely until your permit until your construction permit runs out or your approval. How long does something last once your development has been approved?
So once your construction plans are been approved and you have a site-specific plan, you typically have a 2-year vested period. I mean, that's what the state statute says, meaning that you have 2 years to basically get the final plat recorded. Because once the final plat's recorded, it's vested at that point. Like the division of the land has occurred, like on paper. Maybe not the actual development itself, but the land itself has been approved and it's platted for X amount of lots and the road and all that stuff. And therefore, it, you know, there's no necessary time frame to have to build it out.
So they could technically just keep their sign up indefinitely. Like, because Broadmoor, I feel like Broadmoor got approved prior to me even joining the planning board.
2017.
Right. I didn't think I lived here then. No, I did. I think I did, but I wasn't on the planning board. So I mean, like, it's been a long, I mean, it was a long process, so that's a long time to have a sign if you're not actively selling or.
Here, and I talked to Rick about this, and where you're going is kind of, I'm not gonna say we can do it, and I'm not gonna say we can't do it. It's it gets into, if you guys recall, when we talked about Article 17 with the MDO, the contract neutrality thing. You remember how Rick talked about the federal government says this, but the state statutes say this, and so which one do we kind of listen to, our grandparents or our parents? That's where we're at with this, is that the way, and
Parents, because they're closer, they can smack you faster, so.
which, that's where the way our sign ordinance is written is that we try to make both happy. For example, in Article 17 temporary signs, it says all properties are allowed to have, all residential properties in our SFR districts are allowed to have one temporary sign for a maximum of 6 months, and a maximum of 4 square feet in copy area. So essentially, you're like snipe signs, the ones that, like, say yard sale or whatever. I mean, so because we can't regulate the content, does that make sense?
Right, yeah. I mean,
And
so
it-
I mean, putting it that way makes more sense to have like an end date, and then having to have them reapply. Because the other thing is, like, I mean, I know I work for nonprofit, but my background's in marketing, and like, if you drive by the same sign for 2 years, it becomes part of the landscape. No one's even gonna look at it anymore. So you're not even like marketing anymore, because it's just part of the landscape. So it is in their best interest to make sure their signs are up to date and giving people the right information, or else they're just wasting materials and space. And the signs need to stay, like, weather can really damage signs and make them look really bad. I didn't really see anything in there about having upkeep the sign, like, as long as it is standing, that it's in good repair and.
Well, I think that could be covered, to your point, if we, let's say, do a year, and they can keep reapplying. I mean, we would reissue the same permit, and they would just have to pay the $25 fee. But that is one way we could potentially regulate that. We wouldn't necessarily put it in the ordinance, because I think that's too tricky to kind of write in. But from an administrative level, yes, if that's, let's say, a sign let's say Broadmoor keeps their sign up 4 more years because they haven't sold those lots, if this ordinance gets approved. But whether stuff happens to it, then we could potentially deny the permit because of the condition or quality of the sign, and they would kind of force their hand to have to update it if they want to renew the permit.
Yeah, I mean, I personally like that idea, just because it also forces them to acknowledge the sign, and is it still the correct information? It just keeps bringing it back into focus to make sure that, they don't forget about it, and it's just something that's been put on the back burner. Because they can be unsightly if they.
I would agree with that. Can we also put something in there that has to do with the type of material? So something like Trovicel, that we know that it's going to hold up to the weather, something like that. I mean, again, we would probably have to speak with somebody who's a subject matter expert on that. But again, to put up a sign, as Kelly mentioned, and 18 months into it, it's weathered, it's tattered. What does that say for the Village of Marvin, as well as them as a developer?
So we have, in some form or fashion, we kind of have design guidelines for signs. I mean, it's more kind of directed to your subdivision monument sign, but you could potentially, there's already language in there for post-mounted signs and material. It doesn't get into detail of like specific types of like wood, but like it kind of gives you some overall design guideline, because at the end of the day, as mentioned, like it's kind of like a gray area, tight line, both of getting into, like we're trying to focus on what our current sign ordinance says, is focusing on the sign itself, not the content. So we do kind of have some ways there that we can make sure that the quality and aesthetics of the overall sign itself, or the sign structure, is of well quality and well maintained. But we have to be very careful. Like I wouldn't want to say like the sign copy area had to be a certain material, if that makes sense, because then you're kind of getting into, it's still not content, but then you're getting closer to that, pushing that envelope, like, but if you require, like, it can't be posted on 2 metal posts, it had to be on wood posts and treated lumber type stuff, like, yeah, we could do that all day.
And I don't think, I mean, it doesn't, I don't think we're really that worried so much about the content. It's really just about the materials staying in good repair and that they don't just forget about it and it just inevitably stays up.
Well, and there's ways, so, like I said, I think if we do the permit in the 1 year type thing, let's say hypothetically, once again, if anybody in Broadmoor or from Beechwood's listening to this, you guys are only being used as an example. This is not,
We're sorry.
but once again, let's say Beechwood leaves that sign up. And, or I'll just say a new development, whatever, because technically Beechwood sign's grandfathered, so it can remain. But a new development comes along, they get a temporary permit to do the sign, they renew it for 2 years. Something happens and that sign then becomes in violation because their permit has lapsed and they haven't renewed it. The options are at that point is like Article 17 and then even in Article 23 furthers this. 23 is administrative and enforcement of the MDO as a whole. Gets into that any signs of violation, obviously a notice of violation sent. If they're not, the corrective action would be to either 1, get a permit, or 2, have it removed. If neither action's taken, then the village has the authority to remove the sign. So we do have that avenue to eliminate signs that maybe get put up and then just forget to be taken down.
Do you guys employ fees at all? Like any, like fees for, like if you,
We have our permit fees.
no, sorry.
Oh,
do
you're
you
talking-
enforce like, you get charged $100 fee for not,
So
abiding by whatever the.
it gets,
requirement is?
there's different enforcement actions we can take, like as in abatement, having it removed is one action. The village could do a fine,
Fine, thank you, that was where I was looking.
but we
for.
can't necessarily, if we do a fine, from a legal standpoint, you would issue the fine. If the violation still exists after another time period, you could either issue another fine. Like, yeah, you could induce fines, but at the same time, if they're not going to remove the sign, then why not just go ahead and remove the sign? We would have that, I believe the cost associated to remove that sign would be at the owner's expense, meaning that it would be the same thing if John didn't cut his grass and got a notice of violation letter and still didn't cut his grass, the village can then abate the nuisance, and we would set a lien, we would fine him the cost of what it was to mow his property. If he doesn't pay it, then it just goes to a lien to the property. So that would be the other way, but you wouldn't necessarily just want to keep fining them and let the sign stay, especially if it's becoming a nuisance from that standpoint.
But you could fine them for the cost of.
Yes.
Sending someone to go to remove it, okay. And that happens, so all of the little details that we're talking about here don't necessarily get documented in the ordinance itself. It would be, what, an administrative policy? Like, how does it get recorded?
Well, like I said, it would be, were you talking about like with the condition of the sign? Or?
Right, like stating that the sign must be in,
That's already in a way, when you read Article 17 with like the purpose and intent and some other language, like it's already kind of outlined that way of the signs are supposed to be of high quality, supposed to be maintained, lovely stuff like that. So even though it's not in black and white, it's there, in my opinion. The way that myself, like I said, because I don't think you can really write this in and make it as clear as we're talking, not talking, make it as clear as we want, because I think it would kind of complicate the way the language would read. The way that this would then be enforced is like they would get a permit. A year goes by, they would have to renew the permit. If they don't renew the permit, they would receive a notice of violation because the sign's then in violation. They would have the option to renew the permit. At that time, staff can, like I said, review the condition. For the most part, if a sign's up and they're getting their permit and I get a call, hey, why is the sign still up? It's starting to look bad and stuff. If that's a complaint, then you can address it that way too. I mean, so there's ways that are already outlined in the ordinance through enforcement. that would address that for the most part.
Okay. I think, I don't know about you guys, but after a quasi judicial hearing,
So if I'm hearing,
having things spelled out in black and white or interpretation is like a little,
it's hard, and that's, I mean, Rick kind of hit on this with, when we did the whole, going through every article of the MDO, is that writing ordinances is a skill, and it's a process, and that's what we're gonna kind of talk about, in this agenda item, is that there's things sometimes that's not mentioned or not as clear because you need some of that flexibility to interpret it, depending on the situation. It's also sometimes hard to write things in black and white because like I said, it may make sense to write it in black and white for a certain, like it would apply in a way to a certain portion of Marvin or certain properties or something like that. But then if it's applied in that same black and white way to another, it may not work out the same. And I convey this every time we do text amendments, like we have to think about Marvin as a whole because of how it's going to apply to the village as a whole or those zoning districts that it's specifically applying to. So like with the accessory structure stuff we just talked about, like there's tools definitely within the MDO that probably you could argue that you can't have 17 accessory structures on your property.
but I will argue back with you in a lovely and respectful way, that you, as the planner, always default to, not always, like I can't be generalized like that, but in the cases where we've discussed, you tend to look at technically, can they do this? Yes, and then that is the information that the applicant gets. So it's like, like the interpretation can go in our favor and it could also go against us. And so I just would caution us to make sure that we're not so flexible that
Correct.
like it just can get bent in any way.
100%.
It's like political language just can go all over the place. So it's like,
And that's kind of the key of, and for me or anybody in my position, whatever in any instance that it's a gray area and it's unclear, I always consult with the attorney, and the reason is that if we are making a zoning administrator determination, like I said, you guys were just a part of an appeal of a zoning administrative determination, then I want to make sure that the attorney and myself are on the same page, because if it can get appealed either way, good or bad. If we make one that, even if, like, in instance, if I make one that, yes, is on the flexible end for a property owner, well, the neighboring property owner still has a right to potentially appeal that decision. And then that instance would be if somebody came to me, we used the previous rezoning, if they came to me for an ADU permit for a 3,000 square foot ADU, and I signed off on the permit, you could appeal that decision. And so that's where it can go either way in those administrative appeals, or, decisions. And trust me, there's been times, and this was the biggest issue with, I think, the old ordinance, was that in certain areas, man, it was great. Like, I will say there's certain aspects of the old ordinance that did have some clearer regulations than we have now. Now, some of that goes that state statutes have changed, so it's taken away some of that defining language we can have in that versus what we can have now. And some of that stuff, another thing we're going to talk about is like gated subdivisions and gating over a road type stuff. Like it's in the ordinance and how it reads, but okay, do we need to now potentially put in language like we did in the old ordinance with the gated subdivisions? We added that prior to under the old ordinance. Like, we've been talking internally and of like, hey, is it better just to maybe go ahead and have stuff in here that's kind of clearer? Because we've had certain residents in certain neighborhoods that have asked, hey, we want to gate our subdivision, what's the process? Well, there's a process outlined in the state statutes that if your road's publicly maintained or publicly dedicated, you have to go through the right-of-way abandonment process, which is, we have a policy, we have that set. But it's unclear on if a road is already private, and your neighborhood's another prime example. I talked.
I thought we addressed that in the MDO. I thought we addressed, I remember having very specific conversations about private road,
We allow private roads, but
private roads gating their community and what the process is.
we discussed this with Rick during the MDO process. The short end of what he recommended was that, one, I remember him asking us, is that something we really want? And I think the consensus was like, we don't, it's not like we care to have it, and it's not like we are dying for it. I mean, it's one of those things, it would go either way. So we decided to not necessarily put specific standards for, like, in the old ordinance you had what the gate looked like, how much stacking, your Knox box, and like certain security, emergency service aspects, adequate turnaround, all that stuff.
I actually think it's a deterrent. Like, when you see what all is required, you're like, oh, never mind. And
So-
to Rick's own language, like, Rick used to always drill into us, you put it in there because someone eventually is going to ask for it.
And
so
that's-
you have a way to address it. So that's why when he's saying keep things vague, I'm like, that's not, that
Well, no,
literally
I'm-
goes against what Rick was saying about,
No, and that's, well, the 3 items like we're talking tonight is all because, to your point, have kind of weren't necessarily fully clear or outlined in the MDO currently. And so we do want to get language in there to clarify and have, clear guidelines and regulations for what is coming up. The gating one was interesting because, once again, 95 to 99% of the subdivisions are coming off an NCDOT road. NCDOT has driveway and policies and stuff regarding mainly all that stuff I just talked about. Setbacks from the road. If you're gating it, you got to have sufficient turnaround, basically because they care about their road and not backing up traffic or creating a safety hazard on their road. But Meadowlark, for example, yes, Meadowlark Lane, or is it Lane Drive? What is the Meadowlark Drive? What's your main road?
Meadowlark Lane.
Is it Lane? I can't remember. I feel like I've seen it as Lane and Drive. Either way, it's access from the roundabout, but your actual entrance of the subdivision is, what, 600 to 1,000 yards, feet, whatever you want to say, down. So
We have plenty of room to.
you have plenty of room, and therefore DOT really wouldn't be, now, I consulted with DOT when a representative of your HOA, was just kind of inquiring about it, and they brought up kind of the same stuff, was even though it's far down, like, we want to make sure that there's potentially somewhere to turn around and stuff, because we don't want people backing up into the roundabout. So, but it's just like, they can provide that feedback, but they wouldn't necessarily potentially have a way to enforce it, because you're not, all subdivisions, when they're approved, get a driveway permit application from NCDOT, and basically permitting their access point off their roads. If you're gating it, then you're changing the original design and approved access, so you would have to amend that application. That's where then their standards would come into play and essentially cover, instead of majority of Marvin. But it's these one-off cases that have been, that residents or, members of certain HOAs have reached out, and I relay them that same message about, hey, DOT has these standards, we'd have to consult with them, making sure that what you're proposing is, that they would be fine with, and then they can get a zoning permit for the gate. But now I'm just like, maybe we should just add those standards back in and have it clear.
Because we'll be at NCDOT, like NCDOT might have certain requirements for stacking and all that, but do they have any requirements for the materials used? I mean, it could be, you know what I
Correct.
mean? Like, it could be a garage door.
So,
That'd be awesome.
I mean,
The garage door, you just-
and like I said, the intent of this item is really, like I said, we went through the sign one because that one's came up. That one was kind of clear, and we just went ahead and drafted it. We've done research on gating, and we do plan on bringing back to you guys at the next meeting kind of a proposed text and how that's going to be worked in to the MDO for then further discussion. It sounds like you guys are open or okay or think that we probably should add some gating standards back in. Is that what I'm kind of hearing? Because that's one we.
I mean, I think it gives people people want to know how you do something, and when there is no information, I think it's pretty frustrating, and to have to call someone, that's also a waste of y'all's time. If you just lay it out.
And so, yeah, luckily we did a text for this 3 years ago. So all that research and language is pretty fresh. We did look into it a little further and just checked a few other municipalities. So we'll draft some of that. It'll probably be done similar to how we did it in the old ordinance, meaning that we'll probably add like gated subdivisions into Article 10, which is the uses with additional standards, and that's where then those standards for the gate and all that will be.
It'll help with the community. It'll help the communities as well.
Yeah.
Understand that you have to get, the whole community has to be in on it and
I said that's
responsible for it, like that, because there are plenty of rural neighborhoods that either don't have HOAs and there's no formal way to vote or, so there needs to be a process laid out for them.
and that's what's always conveyed. Like, I'm not going to issue a zoning permit for for example, you guys know the 5 lots there across from the park. It's 2 shared driveways, but they put in a electronic gate. I held that permit for about 3 months until the applicant, which is one of the property owners, had written permission from all the other 4 homes that they were going to have access to the gate or the code or all that, that they were going to jointly be responsible for maintenance and cost of it. On top of, they also got not necessarily approval, but feedback and stuff from DOT as well as EMS. Once I got all that stuff, I said, we're good, and issued the permit. So I was still taking those steps that needed to be done, but in a way, yes, this is one of those situations that it would probably be easier to kind of have. And it's like one of those things, like, do we just limit it to gating subdivisions or even gating driveways? I mean, like, how do we want to kind of approach it? Because the old ordinance was specifically gating a subdivision entrance, a road, and not, but if you wanted to gate your individual driveway, those same design standards didn't necessarily apply. Now, that's where your fence and...
Is there a gate fencing section?
There is in Article 2, and it does talk about height, material, and stuff, but our old ordinance got really detailed in the architectural standards of gates. And that's just the thing, is like, how detailed do we want to be? I'm just trying to get some feedback so when we draft this for you guys next month, like, we don't either overkill it or not provide you enough of what you're kind of expecting.
I think even for the gated driveways, there's a decent amount of gated driveways along Newtown.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them really don't quite look like there's enough stacking. I mean, like, it's barely enough for like an Amazon truck to on the pad, you know what I mean?
And driveways are,
is the Amazon truck.
they're a little bit different, and especially like stacking requirements there, that's still, once again, DOT standards are going to come in there for the most part, but it's a single access, so it's not like you're trying to turn into a neighborhood and then don't have a code and can't get in.
Yeah.
So.
But I do think that we need to reference DOT standards, because if not, we're sending people on a wild goose chase, and it might as well just.
Essentially, I think the gate or the controlled access has to be, it's either 60 or 100 feet back from the edge of pavement or edge of right of way. I can't remember. I'll have to double check that. But I have their subdivision, their manual on that. So if I'm hearing you correctly, we'll draft standards, design, and regulations regarding, setbacks and all that stuff for gated subdivisions, and still have some, try to draft some language regarding like gating a drive, in general. So we'll get that provided for you next meeting.
And back to the vote on the table.
So, well,
Tangent. Are we, is everybody good with these amendments?
Because I thought you were, I'm sorry to interrupt, but are you asking for an approval tonight? Because you said that you thought that there were some things that were still.
are you talking about for the sign? We can do this one of two ways. This is one that I would like to go ahead and get approved because there's other texts that, like I said, we're going to be working on. Those are needed, but I don't, ideally, I would love to package all these up at once and just do one public hearing and one adoption. The issue is that I think this is kind of needed now because I've got, two subdivisions in particular asking, hey, we want to do this, but what do we do? So I want to get language in place where they can get a permit, we issue it. The other ones I want to get done and we're going to bring back next meeting. It's just, I want us to work through some of this and get your guys, solicit your feedback. Because even with the accessory structure and kind of the lot coverage stuff, like we've done some research and once again, we've looked at 10 different ordinances, it seems like maybe more. There's different ways we can do the accessory structure. You can do it through maximum lot coverage. For example, Waxhaw in their zoning district tables has maximum lot coverage. So that's one way to regulate the amount of structures on your property.
That would have been really helpful
And
this past situation.
and that in my opinion is almost, I think, the simplest way to do it. And the reason being is, like I said, I brought up pickleball courts. Pickleball courts is an accessory use, but is it a structure? No, it's an impervious surface. So how do you regulate that? Like, as in, we still treat it as an accessory use, so those same setbacks from property lines have to apply. But I think from a lot coverage standpoint, that covers structures, impervious area, all that stuff, all in one. That also then plays off of like stormwater. I mean, so there's a lot of, I think, benefits there. And like, that's the other, one current way we could look at regulating it is through our stormwater ordinance. For example, the preserve has now once again, the state is the post-construction, they issued post-construction stormwater permits, but the preserve neighborhood was a high-density permit. So all the lots have a 6,500 square foot impervious maximum per lot. Technically, it should be maintained by the HOA and their architectural review committee. However, we do it. Every single permit I ever issue for the preserve, I have a running Excel that shows, because I have all their final as-built surveys that has how much impervious they had left after they built their home. And then if they did an addition, that cuts down that. And there's some homes out there, for example, that have a good amount. There's some that don't. And I've actually had to deny a permit before because of the size of addition they were proposing would have put them over their impervious maximum.
My question to you is, so when it comes to that, can the HOA supersede?
Yes.
It's whatever the stricter rules are, but like.
But I wouldn't be taking, for example, it's the same as like why we did the rural residential, is if your neighborhood, Kelly, I'm gonna use Meadowlark again here. If Meadowlark's neighborhood, CCNRs, and I think maybe it does, says that, and I know yours does, I think that you're supposed to have a minimum of 3 or 4 or 5 acres. 5. Well, if they came to me for a minor subdivision, let's say you had a 5-acre tract in your neighborhood, and they came to me, and it's own rural residential, and they came to me for a minor subdivision, and both lots were 2.5 acres and comply with RR, I have to sign off on it. So I can't, if I know about it, I relay that to applicants because it would be a civil thing in the long run, but I legally can't deny a permit. So to kind of get to that question is that if we do impervious maximums based off district or whatever, but your HOA supersedes that, the HOA can enforce that all day. But I can't.
The only way to do it is to neighbor suing neighbor, or the HOA putting a lien against someone's house.
Well, most
What has
HOA.
always driven me crazy about government is that it is not set up to keep the peace. HOAs are there, it should be, if you have, we file our CCRs, legally, so it's like, that should almost, if they are active CCRs, that should supersede, it should be the most strict,
They do, and like I said, most CCNRs line up with the zoning. Most. Some of your older ones aren't. some,
We were just trying to keep outhouses from happening.
but
It's like, we're not allowed to have
in
toilets outside our
in a
house.
majority of the neighborhoods in their HOAs, they have a ARC, so even if they get a zoning permit, they still have to get approval by their ARC or HOA committee. Some HOAs do it where they require a zoning permit prior to receiving their ARC approval. Some do their ARC approval and then they get the zoning permit. Depends on the organization.
There was a rural lot that was subdivided, and their HOA did not approve it, but it went through anyway, so I don't know what the status of that neighborhood is, but
You talking about a previous rezoning? The property hasn't been subdivided. It was rezoned, but it actually has not been subdivided yet.
it hasn't gotten subdivided yet. But it was still rezoned, so they could subdivide, even though subdividing isn't allowed in their HOA.
Like I said, that is still, from my standpoint, there would be no possible way for me to have every single neighborhood CCNRs and take that into consideration every single time. One, legally, I can't, because I didn't sign the binding document of the CCNR. You as the property owner did, and every other neighbor did. The village didn't.
But it applies to the property, though, so.
Correct.
And then
So-
those then are attached typically to the deed of the property, so.
Like I said, but that's all civil stuff, but getting,
Are you rolling in your grave right now?
yeah. Yeah, trust me, I wish I could solve every single problem in the world, and it feels like you've solved one and 10 more prop up, so,
All right, well, let's go ahead and vote on this, so that.
So, and I would like to clarify for the motion for this, is that potentially recommend the text amendment with the following amendment, and we would add maximum duration, add that a permit is valid for 1 year.
Okay, thank you.
I can help you draft it. Yeah. So,
Would you just add it into the
System.
update?
let's do. They would just renew.
As long as it's in good repair. Yeah, I don't think it's meant, while it might be annoying to renew, I don't think it's meant to hinder, it's just meant to make sure they are paying attention to their sign, so. It's in their best interest, marketing-wise. Ready, is it ready?
Here, you need my help?
Do I add with an amendment, or do I just?
So just put, to recommend the zoning, just put as amended.
Okay.
We can just do it that way.
Okay.
And then for the final document, we'll,
We had to meet.
so the motion, it's just a,
We wanna wait for, I gotta write that he is out of the room. We could, I think it will. He will just be considered a yay during, because he abstained. No, he's considered a yay.
because he didn't ask for an,
Permission to leave?
permit, yeah.
Oh, okay. He'd say yay anyway. All right, so the motion is to recommend approval of zoning text amendment 2025-2 as amended. Yay or nay? Yay. 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 All right, so moved. I know we got off on a bit of a tangent there, but I think that was still a good discussion. It was a
No,
good discussion.
and that's, like I said, the intent of this is, obviously, we had the MDO, then we had some big rezonings, so we have been busy. At the current moment, you guys are an active board, there's ways that we can be proactive in looking at, ways to make our ordinances stronger and better. And so now that we kind of have the time, we're trying to work on that. We just felt like that some of these, we felt like we knew which way we were leaning on top of thinking how you guys would feel, but we definitely wanted to solicit your guys' input, kind of get some direction. So now we have that, and we'll prepare that, those additional amendments regarding gates and accessory structures or lot coverage, however we kind of structure it, for the next meeting. And this is something that we'll probably, like I said, continue in doing unless we have applications on the agenda.
So accessory dwellings and structures, we're going to be talking about?
Structures specifically,
Okay, structures.
meaning like,
Dwellings is already,
Okay. correct.
yeah,
So the-
I'm not proposing us to amend the accessory dwelling
No,
size
that's
or any of
fine,
that stuff.
Because that's, the structures are
Yeah.
quite important.
Guys, really quickly, can you raise your hand for the rezoning request if you voted no? I just didn't count who voted what. These just four? You voted no? Thank you so much.
There is. So, a few items. One, if you guys, I know I've been kind of talking about it in the previous meetings, talking about our land use plan. Our land use plan.
land use, okay, sorry.
The village, the council did approve in the budget funding for us to do a new comprehensive plan. We did do an RFQ and solicit firms to submit qualifications and their proposal. That submittal period closed on Friday. We received 5 submissions, which is I'm very happy about. The 5 firms were Kimley Horn, InFocus, Inspire, Hill Associates, and Bowman, which Bowman also submitted for the Parks and Rec comprehensive plan updates that are going to be done. With that being said, we're currently reviewing those submittals. It'll be on council's agenda next Thursday at their work session. Staff will, basically, there's an evaluation criteria that was outlined in the RFQ, and we will essentially score the submittals and provide a recommendation to the village council next Thursday on what firm we'd be recommending. If council basically concurs, then they will motion to basically approve X firm as the first selection and kind of rank them for the most part, and then allow staff to begin contract negotiation. That project for the comprehensive plan will be anywhere from a 12 to 18-month process. The way it'll be done is, we wanted these proposals to be kind of creative and let them kind of propose on what they would recommend. For the most part, and this is which way I was leaning anyway, because this is always how it's done, is essentially we would potentially have council establish a comprehensive plan committee, similar to the old Heritage District Committee, and appoint members to that committee. So it'd be a steering committee. Most likely that would comprise of at least 1, if not 2, planning board members, 1 or 2 PRNG members, a council member, and then potentially 3 or so at large. We would kind of look through the composition of that board based off of what firm we select and what they kind of recommend. So if you guys are interested in that, feel free to let me know. It is an exciting project. Basically, it would be to replace our land use plan and basically kind of build off of it to an extent, but because you have some goals and recommendations, you got a foundation in our current land use plan, but there's more that can be done. I mean, the comprehensive plan, as you guys know, planning board and council use it to make land use decisions. And so what staff wanted to do is really get a better document that had more tools and information in there for staff, planning board, and the council to make those decisions and have the tools in the toolbox, as Rick would say, to really evaluate and make better decisions. It'll play off of using public feedback and stuff from the current 2025 public survey that we're doing now, right? It's out, I believe.
It starts September.
Starts in September. We're advertising. So that will be kind of incorporated in. There will be a lot of public engagement, a part, a component of the planning process. And hopefully in 12 to 18 months from now, we'll have a fully completed draft plan and have it adopted, and it will basically, like I said, replace our current land use plan.
But you said the members of this like subcommittee would be appointed,
Correct.
not volunteered.
You can volunteer, but when you do a steering committee, and this is where Austin's gonna kill me, is that
Those are your thoughts.
we can have it as a working group, and it can be volunteer. It depends on, one, what the firm recommends, and then two, what our attorney's probably gonna recommend. With it being a big plan, it may be something where the planning board would have, or not the planning board, the council would basically, similar how they established the PRNG board, they would establish a board and basically have its rules of procedure, all that make up, and then appoint members to that.
Okay, my only request would be that rural is represented.
And that, once again, that is the intent, is that you would have, the steering committee would be comprised of different opinions and different views and different representation of the population of Marvin. But you still would have at least two, if not more, public engagement. You would have like probably an open house at the beginning, and then you would have a plan presentation at the end that's open to the public, and you solicit all the feedback from the public and incorporate that into the plan goals and recommendations.
Maybe you could get a representative from every neighborhood, because that encompasses all the zoning.
Like I said, I'm gonna let the consultant probably determine that. The only issue with that is that then your board makeup gets a lot of people in one room. Meaning that, yeah. And like I said, we would still be soliciting feedback to incorporate in these plans from these neighborhoods and stuff, and making sure that they're involved or aware of the process. That steering committee is, like I said, just the technical committee, and kind of that the consultant will be utilizing to get kind of information or kind of, that feedback and stuff directly from, that kind of builds the foundation and base of the plan. And then they would go and obviously present that draft to the public once all that's done, and then take that feedback and then kind of tweak it from there based off of what's proposed. So,
Sorry for interrupting, but would the Park and Recs, because I've never understood why Park and Rec wouldn't be a part of this. I mean, land use is, they're so adjacent to each other that like they need, if we don't know what they're doing, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, I feel like sometimes those goals can
that's the
clash, so-
other reason for this plan, is a comprehensive plan, hence the word comprehensive, is more detailed and essentially your guiding overall plan. The goal of this is to bring all the other adopted plans, the Parks and Greenway Master Plan, the Parks and Recreation Comprehensive Plan, any road transportation plan with, CRTPO, all of that into one document, not necessarily bringing the document itself in, but like in the Parks and Rec chapter of the comprehensive plan, it would reference this plan, and so they do play off each other. They play off the goals and recommendations. So it's building and utilizing existing adopted plans and trying to get it all cohesive into one document for the most part.
It'd be nice to like know what the left hand's doing.
Correct.
I
Because
think their plans should inform our plans and vice versa.
And that's the biggest thing, is that's why when planning board and even council, when they adopt or are approving rezonings, it states that is consistent with the current adopted land use plan and any other officially adopted plans. Because the intent of that is to use these plannings or planning documents for long-term plan. But the goal of it is really to get a clear community vision that will then, something that staff, like I said, really even the PRNG board will utilize in decision-making and directives over the next 20, 30 years. You know, it could comprise of like, and these are all just like examples, but there's going to be like a stormwater infrastructure chapter, and it could identify like, hey, you know, the village's population is this at the current time, based off current growth trends of Charlotte or the greater Charlotte area, Union County, all this. The projected population of Marvin in 10 years is this. Therefore, you guys would qualify for becoming an MS4, which means we would do the post-construction stormwater permitting and outline implementation, like an implementation matrix on how we achieve that. And so that's the biggest thing, is really kind of setting some of these goals and recommendations and having a guidebook of implementation to accomplish the planned goals over the long term.
I mean, that alone, stormwater is alone, like, I think we're so far behind the curve with stormwater because we've seen unprecedented amounts of rainfall. I mean, like 100-year floods are happening like every other flippin' week. And so, you know, just getting ahead of that, how much impervious land, you know, per acre. I mean, I think that also speaks to the, you know, the structures,
Correct. I mean,
you know what I mean? Like, it all goes to increasing stormwater runoff and flooding people's properties, and so.
well, I will say our stormwater ordinance already goes way above and beyond the state, and it has been, has been above that standard for 10 plus years.
Right.
15.
But I mean, I'm interested to see if there are updated numbers on, like, just in terms of.
But that number, for example, ours goes up to the 100-year rain event. That number is not like a set number in time, meaning like that the 100-year event changes, so it just depends on when the development proposes. What's good about it going to the 100-year event, even though they're occurring more frequently, that means the stormwater infrastructure in a lot of these developments are developed to withhold that if that was the normal event. So that's the positive of it. If it was, you know, DEQ goes up to the 25, let's say 5 years from now, 25-year events or a yearly event type thing, or or an everyday, I don't know. That means you're going to have problems in the long run. So we have built that, which is one good thing that we have done to be proactive there. It goes way above and beyond and ensures that developments are being built for the long haul, and infrastructure being in place that will not create a issue for those residents or residents downstream in the long term. So that is a positive. But there's still ways that we can make sure, like I said, if we had a stormwater program, you know, it would outline, you know, routine maintenance of catch basins and inspections, and to ensure that everything's functioning how it was originally developed for. And if not, we then identify that, fix it, and keep on moving forward. So that's kind of the big goals of all. I mean, like I said, that's why we want to do a bigger plan, to really think about where we're at, where we're going to be, where we're going to go, and what that's going to look like and what that's going to take to get us there.
Hunter, what is the timeline putting the steering committee together?
Once the council approves the firm next week, contract negotiation will begin. Hopefully, then we would have a contract back in front of council for approval, either at most likely the September work session. Part of that contract will then have like the finalized scope of work by the consultant, and we would have that identified kind of then. So essentially, once that contract's approved and the scope of work's finalized, which would be, like I said, either September work session or October regular meeting for council, at that time, because we would have a timeline with that scope, so then they would propose, just as hypothetical, like a project kickoff date for, let's just say mid-October, or let's just say 1st of November. So then council would then have to establish that committee. It would probably be done concurrently. But, so like I said, the finer details of that will be forthcoming.
I was just thinking, you know, after the election.
We have discussed that. It really then, that's up to council to an extent, meaning that if they want to delay getting the project started till then, my thought was, to keep the project moving, because one, it's budget, so we have to think about when the numbers are being spent, that whatever council member wants to be appointed to the board as being one that's not up for reelection currently, just, that would be one recommendation. Or if we would be so early in the process, depending on the outcome of the election, obviously, one of the new members could be appointed that way. So it's all, like I said, we would be working through those details, and it may be a working committee.
Or if a new newly elected member was a previous planning board member, they'd be a perfect fit for,
Correct.
just saying that. I know. That's why I said it.
So, yeah, so I just wanted to let you guys know, like I said, we did solicit, we got good amount of responses, so, and we've been pleased with what we've, reviewed so far. It's actually kind of hard to determine on which firm's the best fit. And so therefore, once we get all that finalized, we'll get the ball rolling. But we want to get this project going, and I think it's going to be great, and it's definitely planning board will still be involved, meaning it'll still probably come, when I will provide quarterly or monthly reports on just the status of the project, on top of, I'm sure that we would work in that we would bring draft deliverables or draft, like kind of if it's a quarter or halfway through the project, bring it to planning board for review. And then it goes through the same process as like the MDO. So it still has to go to planning board for recommendation. The council has to hold a public hearing and then adopt the plan. So, it'll definitely, regardless if you're volunteering or on this potential committee, you guys will still be involved and up to speed on it for sure.
I don't think we have any action items, so board member comments. John, you've just been number one all night, so we're gonna let you go first again.
Staff, thank you for your work.
Ditto. All right,
Move to adjourn.
all in favor? So moved. We denied it.
Well, no, I was there for that.
Oh, sorry. So the second one.
Yeah.
So, basically what we had to